Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Let's Chat. We're glad that you are able to join us this evening. I'm here with my sidekick, Kinte, and we've got an exciting show for you today. And without further ado, I will kick it over to Kinte, but I will tell you that wherever you are watching us from in the world, I'm representing England tonight because this is where I live, and it is currently 12:11 a.m. So make sure you clock in your time zone wherever you are, what country you're in, and all that kind of stuff, because we'd love to hear from you. So what's up, Kinte?
Man, I'm hanging in there. It's been a tough couple of days, but I'm glad. I had a little drama at my crib, and I have some plumbing issues that I'm getting worked out. So it's always something. Every time when you think that everything is cool, you could just focus on life. And then all of a sudden, some shit comes out of nowhere. Literally, excuse my French, even though I don't think that was French. But I'm glad to be here, and I'm so happy to chop it up with these fine people tonight. So we're gonna start off, ladies first. This young lady I've done many a podcast with. I consider myself a admirer of the work that she puts out into the world. She's an author. She's a host. She's a mom. She works in academia in Canada. It's the one and only L.A. Wade. How are you doing, L.A.?
I am blessed and highly favored, in the words of our favorite Dr. Vibe. I feel really great. Thank you for having me here tonight.
All right. I'm so glad that you are here. And also joining us, this is a returning champ. This brother's been on so many indie radio programs. Uh, we have the one and only Ryan Perez. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing beautiful. I'm doing great. It's awesome. It's awesome to be back. I always miss these shows, Kente.
All right. All right. So I'm going to kick it over to you, LA. You want to set up the show tonight?
I am.
I'm sorry, Carlette. I'm sorry. My bad. My bad.
If you joined us last week, we were talking about, we were comparing experiences of racism in the United States and in England, because that's why I'm over here. I came over here to write my PhD thesis on the racial experiences among Black American women and Black British women. So we thought it would be interesting to expand that and take a look at Canada. So we have invited two Canadians here, and we hope to continue that conversation and do another comparison of the racial experiences in America versus Canada, because a lot of Black Americans, I think, are under the misnomer or naive enough to think that racism is not the same in other countries. And we are here to tell you that it most definitely is. And in some cases, it's even worse. So I'm going to kick it over to LA so she can usher us into the discussion. And then Ryan, we'll hear from you.
Well, I don't know if I am the one to set up the conversation, but I am happy to explain that for me, as a Black woman in Canada, and what it looks like from the perspective of the United States and the United Kingdom, I would say that racism is alive and well globally. That's what I would say. And although it's expressed differently based on the systemic priorities that each country holds, I think their effects are the same and are lasting in that way. Is that a good segue? Is that a good setup?
Perfect. No, I love it.
I would like to expand on that a little bit. And that was one of the biggest findings. I think that even though it was a very small study, that because I could only manage so many people, is that I think we can draw the conclusion from my study and Dr. Assad, who did a study of the experiences of Black women in California and in the Netherlands, that regardless of where we are, Black women are going to experience racism similarly. So with that said, can you maybe, you were talking about some of the main difference between America and England, and it's that it's very nuanced here. I think it's ingrained in their culture. They actually believe that they are not racist. However, institutional and systemic racism here is absolutely rampant, especially in academia. Here in the UK, there are only 50 Black female professors in the entire UK, which includes England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So there are 50. And let me tell you, I've lived here for 5 years. And when I got here, there were only 25. So, and I think it doubled as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement. So,
yeah, I would say that that is accurate. I would say that it's accurate. Obviously, I'm generalizing because I haven't done specific research in that area, but I will say that Canada is a British colony. So we very much represent a lot of those British values, but we are very much influenced by our American, partners that are just to the south of where we live. And I think there are symbolic ideals of what racism is, of what Blackness is. I wrote a paper about something called symbolic proximity, where I talk about the internalized ideals of what makes someone successful and how our behavior conforms to those ideals in order to move up in trajectory. And to some of us think that we can we can transgress racial lines. And of course, that's an illusion. So I think that as a Black woman in Canada, I can very much see how people will play by the rules in order to move up in the trajectory of their lives, not realizing what they are willing to sacrifice in terms of themselves and how they see the other Black individual. I think that they don't.
That's profound what you just said, and it's also reflective of the political climate over here in the UK right now, because Rishi Sunak, who is a brown man, he's Indian descent, I believe. I'm sorry if I got that wrong.
Yeah, probably because that's what they refer to themselves as, is brown, because they have to make the distinction from Black.
Yes. But he's just been made, he's the prime minister here now. And, people.
That's big. Wow.
Well, but see, he is more brutally racist.
Yes.
As we know that the Black overseer that, the master put in charge. And it's more painful coming from somebody who looks like ourselves than it is because we expect that from white people.
But I think that's by design.
Oh yeah, but he's something else. He's dangerous toward people
because
of color.
it gives people it co-signs the inappropriate behavior towards melanated people globally. It maintains that status quo, and that's why it is so dangerous. And I completely agree with you. But these things, these archetypes, and these ideals have been internalized by many of the people of melanated descent in Canada. And I think we're just really confused because it's hard for us to stand up without having large groups of people that know our history, that understand what the agenda is to keep us divided and separate. Canada is a large landmass, and we are very much separated by that landmass. So we don't have the opportunity to really blend in the way that the US has that capability. And very much the history of it is kind of like over there in Nova Scotia. It's in silos. So we don't necessarily, we have to operate where we are. And so where any given Black person in Canada is, they bend to the rules of where they live in order to survive. It's not about not knowing themselves as a Black person. It's about, is it worth it for them to acknowledge their Blackness in a climate that does not recognize their Blackness?
Which, that's a great point. And I want to ask Ryan this question. That's a really good point, because over here, so Black people make up roughly 13% of the US population. And over here in the UK, Black people only make up 3% of about 61 million people.
Right.
So what is that? You're talking about space and how we're spread out. How is that ratio, or what's the percentage in Canada?
I don't know if you know this, Ryan, but I have a stat that says 1.2 million people in Canada self-report as Black, and that includes 620,000 of them being women and girls. So when
One
you think of a
point,
population of a whole
Yeah.
country and only 1.2 million of us are Black, that gives you some perspective.
Wow.
And we're not
Yeah.
all in the
that's
same
not
place.
even a percentage point, is it?
Yeah.
Right. It might be 0.1%.
Wow, I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
But that's
Yeah.
out of 34, million. There's not even a lot of people here in general.
Right.
We have such a large land mass, and we have several major cities. Our population can fit in one state, right? So
Yeah,
the
California. If
I
Canada
had
can
no
fit in
idea.
California.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. A whole country with 34 million people, as big as Canada.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And
I didn't know that.
and I would say that, and it's funny how people will identify as Black, but even working in, doing work in the Black community here in Alberta, where I live in a province that has history that ties back to the Civil War. All of the folks that lost during the Civil War in America jumped ship. The Confederate crew jumped ship and settled in Alberta. So we live in KKK capital. So you have to be careful of where you you have to be careful of where you go in certain parts of Alberta, because this community has been here for a very long time. So when it comes to racial politics, there's not a lot of people in Canada, like when you're in Ontario, it's a different perspective. There is more of a culture, Black culture there.
Yes.
When you're in Alberta, depending on where you live, in Edmonton, a little bit of Black culture, but where you are if you're in Calgary and you're part of oil and gas, there's a lot of people here don't identify as Black. I actually did did 3 award shows for the Black community, and it was really hard. It was like picking needles out of a haystack. A lot of people didn't want to identify as Black because they think of themselves as their ethnicity. So if they came from Ghana, then they're Ghanaian. If they're Nigeria, they're Nigerian, right? If they're from the Caribbean, if they're Trinidadian, Jamaican. So you have all of these different groups that don't identify as Black. Only during Black History Month, everybody's like, let's talk about Black History Month. But a lot of the times we live in groups that we live amongst people that are really not for the Black culture per se. And I will say this in addition to that. You have to think that a lot of people immigrate here. In America is different. There is a tied history to slavery. There's a tied history. Like everyone's related to slavery and colonization, so on and so forth. Here we are part of the African diaspora, but we all share certain experiences, but our cultures are really different. And a lot of us migrate from different parts of the world. And you have to think, when people are migrating from different parts of the world, they don't know the systemic racism that we know here. Those who live in Canada and have to can see the subtle nuances. I did a piece the other day, like on TikTok, just talking about my experience in the dating world. And I've talked about this for years, but I called it the dating apartheid, because I realized that a lot of the times Black people are being shifted out of the dating results here in Calgary. Especially, no one wants to date Black, and if they are going to date Black, then they want to fetishize you. And one of the issues that I brought up was that whenever I was dating interracially, and I had a problem with that person in regards to microaggressions, what they would do is they would then go to their black friend who could come from Nigeria or could come from the Caribbean or whatever, and ask them for validation. And because they're not necessarily educated about Black history in general, so on and so forth, they will omit the things that I'm saying, they're like, oh no, man, that's not racist. Oh no, man, that's not this, that's not that. And you have to deal with those politics here. So, blackness is so convoluted here in Canada. And I think that, and that's all because of where we're coming from. And a lot of the Black people are coming from, Commonwealth, coming from the Commonwealth. And I feel like all of the Commonwealths, we still carry on a little bit of colonial culture with us, our grandparents, so on and so forth. And then even talking about the bleaching of skin and just the self-hatred. I see that much more as I get older. I see that much more within certain communities. So it's very hard to be Black and be unified.
Yeah, I would say that it's very much like what W.E.B. Du Bois kind of identified with the double consciousness. That is alive and well here in Canada. And so to Ryan's point, it's not that we don't know that we're Black. It's that it's not advantageous for you to identify as Black, although we are identified as Black.
Mhm.
So it's very, it's like you said, it's convoluted, and we are stuck in between. It's the in-betweenness of our identities that make it difficult for us to come together and fight a common predator in our oppressor.
Very interesting. So, Kinte, I just want to invite anybody who is watching or listening, if you'd like to put a comment or ask a question, you're certainly welcome to do that, and we'll take your questions shortly.
You know what's interesting? One time Ryan was on my program, and someone asked, who was from Canada, a white person from Canada, asked where he was from, and when I said where he was from, this white woman was like, "Oh man, I feel for him."
Wow.
Oh yeah. I live in Ontario, and I know that, like, we all know that there's nothing. We have a saying in Jamaica, even though I'm not Jamaican, but "Not naguan" in Calgary for
Not
our
naguan.
culture.
Yeah, not
naguan.
Well, I can say that I've only been to Canada twice, but one time that I was there, I went to Vancouver, which is British Columbia, I know, but I was there. I worked for a major travel association at the time, a nonprofit, and we were having a conference there, and we had over 500 delegates there, and over 100 of us came down with food poisoning. And
wow.
it was like, it was like, we all, of course, ate at different times, ate at different places, so we weren't able to identify. But I mean, a couple of people were hospitalized, and that was the one time I really, really thought I was going to die. And
oh my God,
it was that bad. And there was that rumor floating around that it had been intentional. I don't know if that would ever be proven, but. And then the other is a friend of mine who is from Alberta invited me to her wedding. And I was just like, I don't know if I want to go because, I'm well aware of the situation. And I just, so do you, because I can say that in my circles, we've had these conversations where we walk into a room and the first thing we do is look to see if there's another Black person there. And once we see that Black person, we kind of like, okay, I'm not the only one.
Right.
What is that? What does that feel like in a country where there are like only 1 million Black people? Are your chances of running into another Black person slim? Or like, what is that about?
Well, I don't know if you want to answer that first, Ryan. I'm happy to say that because we're in different provinces.
Yeah.
So in Ontario, I run into
different.
Black people all the time. But what I will say is, based on your socioeconomic status and the spaces that you circulate in, you could have that issue that you're talking about. I work at a university here in Canada that is, pretty well known. It's pretty upper echelon. And so in my workspace, although there are other Black people that work at the university, in my position, there are not. I think I was the first Black woman to hold my position in this country.
Wow.
Right. And I only got that position 13 years ago. So it's not, and I don't know how many others there's been. Maybe now there's one other. I don't know. But so yeah, in the meetings there's not really a lot of black people. But on the street you see all kinds of black people here in Ontario, in Toronto specifically anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. I've been to Toronto, have family out there, and completely different experience. There is, a patty shop, roti shop, double shop, shop, everywhere, shop. And LA is lucky. Even when I watch LA's content, LA.
You watch my content, Ryan?
Yes, I do. Of course, it's LA.
I'm just kidding.
You know. But like when I watch LA's content, LA is having conversations that I crave to have when it comes to the Black experience, because LA is educated, she's connected. But my sister went over to Toronto. She went to university, and she's more aware of the social dynamics of being Black in Ontario. Here is a completely different story. I grew up not thinking that I was different. I grew up thinking that I was like the white boys because I lived. That's all I knew. I didn't know any different. I didn't see a lot of Black people, and I wasn't craving for more Black people. It wasn't that I just didn't have any awareness. But when I went to Toronto, I was like, like this is dope. Coming back here, and then, even like I remember when hip hop wasn't a thing, and just loving, like listening to Jodeci when I was a kid and listening to all these songs and bringing it to school, and everybody's laughing at me because everybody was listening to rock. And
wow,
all of a sudden hip hop becomes a major thing, and I got really pissed. And I am a little like,
I was an early adopter.
I'm a gatekeeper because that's where I found my identity, was through the music and through the culture, whatever I could salvage. So when you're around here, you can't go in certain spaces, and you definitely have to code switch. It is, and you can't mention Black. A lot of people think that Blackness is, phenotype. So when you bring up the conversation of Black, then they're thinking, oh, you want to bring race into this. I'm like, no, I'm Black by ethnicity, and specifically I'm Black Canadian. And I think that functional distinction needs to be said, because we don't have, and I have these conversations in my head as far as what is racism, what is white supremacy. And if I were to chunk it down, for me, white supremacy is ownership and maintenance over land that doesn't belong to them. So when you have equity in something that doesn't belong to you, you're going to try to hold it tight as much as possible, right? Black people on this land in Canada is different than Black people that live in the United States. And I'll say why. Is that we don't own Crown land. Crown land, the British monarchy owns every square inch of this landmass. So if I bought land, it's not mine. It's still the Crown's land. And so when it comes to my ethnicity, I don't know my mother tongue. I don't know where I come from. You could trace me back to Trinidad, but again, we don't have any, they a lot of the times when the slaves revolted and so on and so forth, and these Caribbean islands got their independence, they burnt the records. So we have no trace of who we are and where we come from, and we don't have any landmass to go back and claim. So we are literally an ethnicity that is creating we are creating a new identity based on our proximity to who we thought we were, or who we are. And because we're so far gone from all of that, we have to find a way of being able to speak about our Blackness in a way that does not stop our bag. And a lot of people choose their bag over their identity, over their Black ethnicity here. So it's very hard to be in certain spaces when you're the only Black person to bring up Black issues. You know, I remember people not wanting to do business with me because I was speaking up about, sorry, someone's calling. I was speaking up about racism. And I'm telling them, hey, it's not about my phenotype. I'm speaking about racism because every part of my identity has something to do with the disenfranchisement of my ancestors. Every single bit of my identity. So I'm always going to come from Blackness from that perspective because that's what anchors me and that's what allows me to navigate and even find opportunities to be able to survive, is by knowing that that information about who I am, you know, because I feel lost. And then you know, as a person, because you can't find the connection here, especially in Alberta, I go to you guys in the United States. I'm reaching out, but then again, there's politics in even in within that. I can't speak on certain Black issues because I'm not FBA. You know what I mean? I'm not, you know, part of, you know, I'm not FBA. I'm not part. There's another group. You know, so when they
What's
see that
FBA?
I'm sorry, what's FBA?
Foundational Black American. Basically,
Oh.
me and you, Carlette, are foundation. If you know, we're not Caribbean or
Right.
African or something like
yeah.
that.
Oh, that's
So-
good to know because I've often struggled to identify what that is. So that's good to know. I just want to take a brief second to give a shout out to Renee. She joined us a little while ago and says hello to everybody. And she's put a comment that says, unfortunately, that happens a lot here in the US as well, in spaces where you're one of a few, if not the only Black person in the space. You have to be careful how you introduce your Black issues. And Lord have mercy, isn't that the truth?
I suck at that because I just do it like a bull in his china shop. So, but you
I've
know,
often struggled with that though, Kinte.
Mhm.
I've often struggled in being true to my Blackness while trying to function in white corporate America, you know, because you're always labeled angry. I was always the one with the attitude, you know. If I went to a supervisor to complain about some white woman carrying negative attitude, then I was said, well, you know, I was expected to accept that and learn to get along with her rudeness and things like that. So there's a tremendous amount of pressure on us to code switch, like Ryan said, and to to shoulder a lot of the responsibility because we can't even express being frustrated about being discriminated against.
You know what's interesting is we have this issue here as well, but I know some Caucasian Canadians who are very liberal, right? They're so liberal and they're so, you know, they wish they had an Obama, and you know, and all of this stuff, right? And but it's one thing I notice about white liberal Canadians is they have this fascination with the indigenous people, and to the point where it's like they'll bring it up, and they're like really proud about how we've changed, how they've changed the way they dealt with the indigenous, and how we're looking forward. It's going forward instead of backward, and all of this stuff. And I'm, you know, it makes my head, you know, I get a vein in my head. But are you guys aware of what I'm talking about? This love for the indigenous, and they, you know, and they think that
Yeah.
now they're so awesome now.
Well, that's because that came
before,
about because of the Truth and Reconciliation, right?
right, right. One person said, you know what we do before a basketball game? We take a moment of silence for the indigenous people we screwed over. And, you know,
listen, that's for white guilt. That's white guilt.
That is white guilt. And
You know,
this whole thing where liberalism has become,
oh man, don't make me start.
Liberalism and non-racism, they've tried really hard to make them synonymous. And, you know, I know some of the most racist white people claiming to be liberal, especially when it comes to white women who cling on to feminism. But their feminism doesn't include Black women.
No.
So yeah, I'm like, whatever.
No, you can serve. You could serve at the convention. You can serve the donuts and the coffee. But,
Yeah.
but the spoils of what they're gonna get, no, we're gonna keep that for ourselves.
Well, the one thing we should say is that on Turtle Island, there's still genocide within the indigenous communities.
Mhm.
There are still women missing. There are hundreds of thousands of children that are in the graves, of the residential schools. And if anyone who doesn't know about the residential schools, but the Catholic Church and the Canadian government essentially created this mass genocide of these children and abused them and tortured them.
And that's just now coming to light. I'm sorry, Ryan, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that's just now becoming publicized, that people are finding out. And this happened, when was it? The 40s, 50s?
Yeah, it was, I don't know the year. It was all up to the 90s. They've had these schools operating. And the Pope came by the other day to apologize, but I think that's where the truth and reconciliation lies. They put a thing on his head, like a headdress on his head, and I think everything was forgotten. But I will say that a lot of us are recognizing that we're on treaty land, especially here, because there's certain parts of Canada where there are larger portions of Indigenous people here. We have to talk about Indigenous rights because, it's synonymous with our rights and white supremacy. If you're trying to battle white supremacy and not address Indigenous people's rights, then you are contradicting yourself. You're contradicting the movement. In addition to that, the other thing too that we have to realize is that there are a lot of individuals who from the white community that have Indigenous ancestry. So that creates a lot of issues, because there's a lot of people that look white, and some of them will call themselves white passing, not knowing what white passing really means, right? But they are like, yeah, I'm white passing, but I'm Indigenous. And so their identity is tied to the land. Their identity is tied to whatever, if there was a treaty signed with these Indigenous groups, their identity is tied to that. So it makes things interesting, because some people who have that Indigenous backgrounds, yes, they are going to talk about their Indigenous backgrounds, but there are individuals that still benefit from white supremacy, even though they have that Indigenous lineage. And there are fights about who's Indigenous and who's not. The one drop rule. It's like, because you're white, some people are saying you're not Indigenous, and there's all of that happening in Canada as well, right? So I just wanted to kind of bring that up. I don't think it's a bad thing for people to mention what land we're on, but I think that we're not doing enough to bring issues about Indigenous matters into the forefront.
I'm going to say something very controversial. Okay. Right?
Go for it.
Just bear with me. So this whole idea of BIPOC in Canada is so fucking annoying that I don't really have the language to dissect it. But what you're saying is true, Ryan. But when I can't even talk about my own cultural issues, I should not be taking up arms for another culture's issues. And that's just kind of like where I am with it, is that I don't believe that the Indigenous people should be treated the way that they've been treated. I think it's wrong. I think they've been treated much like, it reminds me of how Black people in the United States have been treated back in those times where that North-South thing kind of, that's how they were treated, and very systematically and systemically. And I will fight for Indigenous people, but I can't, you're talking about not even being able to identify as Black, much less fight for Indigenous rights. So there's like, this BIPOC thing that they like to do, where they put BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, people of color,
Right.
and it is so dehumanizing to do that. Let's just start there, because what the hell falls under people of color? Number
Right.
one. Number two, Black issues are not the same issues as people of color, nor is it the same issues as Indigenous. Are there similarities? Sure.
Mhm.
But to take my experience and reduce it for me to have to acknowledge all of the plights that other people have gone through without even fully investigating what has happened to me, this is where I get like really frustrated, because I'm so tired of being called BIPOC when I'm Black and I have a real issue being Black specifically in this country. So that's just
Okay,
me.
so let me just
Let me just get off my
piggyback on
chest.
that. No, no, I think that was great. And let me just jump in here and say that over here it's called BAME,
It's called what?
BAME. And I had never heard of that shit until
What's
I
it called?
came over here. BAME. I'm going to tell you in a second. I had never heard of it until I'd moved over here. And it stands for Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic.
That's worse than BIPOC.
Oh wow.
But LA, they lump everybody into, so it's white and BAME. And the bad thing about that is, and this is what I had a problem with African American, because if you're African American doesn't mean that you're Black, okay? So this is why I have a problem with BAME. First of all, you're gonna put Black and Asian means East Asian and Southeast Asian that they lumped in together, and minority ethnic, which could be the Irish traveler or
Oh
a white,
my
any
God.
other white person. East European is minority ethnic. So they have put everybody into one category, and they just be walking around talking about BAME this and BAME that. And I had never heard of it until
I never heard that shit till just now.
Every time I
Wow.
hear it, it makes my skin raw.
Wow. BIPOC, which actually sounds like a bisexual Tupac.
Let's
Yeah,
not
no, cream.
let's stay to the race issue, please.
Hey, that's the first thing I thought when you said it.
I personally, I don't have a problem with, I don't have a problem with BIPOC, but I identify as Black. And as you can see, like even when I'm in corporate meetings with, like we just elected somebody in office here who is the premier, and I'm working in one of these organizations that she used to be a president of. So I always make it known that I'm blackity black, because it is what it is. But I also understand that there are intersectionalities that.
Yeah, but they're not going to care about your issues unless you're also bringing in the IPOC version of your Blackness. You can't talk about your Blackness without bringing in the IPOC part of it. And that's
it just seems like it's so trendy, because I was speaking with an Egyptian woman, and she was a very fair-skinned Egyptian woman. She could pass for white if she wanted to, and she was walking around talking about she was a woman of color, and I'm just like,
And there's nothing wrong with it. She is a woman of color, but she's not having the same issues as Black women that are considered
and
Black
that's
women
the
of
problem.
color.
That is the problem. Her color is not going to be the same experience as my color.
Yeah.
And then that's when you start lumping people into these acronyms, is when you really have a problem.
You know what, I have maybe like a shift in the conversation. The one thing I do have a problem with is the definitions of racism, and how we've blurred the lines of what racism is, what white supremacy is, because here I find, I don't know if it's the same experience for you, LA, but when Black people are talking about issues that affect us, and we use the word white folks or whatever the situation may be, then we're racist.
You're right.
And I'm having to recirculate this conversation. I'm like, do you really know what racism is? Do you know how it began? Do you know where it comes from? Because the thing about Canada that we have to remember is that everything in terms of racism, and when you think back at Bacon's Rebellion, and how the anti-miscegenations laws kind of gave a tone to what racism is, and everyone kind of jumped on that bandwagon and made made this thing into a real social construct. Canada took the same, like the British government took what they learned in United States and then implemented it better in Canada, implement it better in all of the different colonies that they have. Like from the fact that we don't have a Second Amendment, I believe that we should have a Second Amendment, but the fact that we don't have one, I think, is an issue. The other thing is our privacy laws. I think that also is an issue. There are a lot of laws here that really prevent Black people from mobilizing and grouping. For example, our anti-discrimination laws. Kind of protect people from outwardly discrimination, but you can't have a Black only business. You can't say, hey, I'm only hiring Black people. The only way you can actually hire somebody that is of the same community is by language. And a lot of people don't know that about these laws, and the anti-racism laws. It doesn't go, like, I feel like the protections don't go far enough. So a lot of people, when they are within this BIPOC spectrum, a lot of people think that when certain things happen, it's equal playing field to be able to weigh in on subjects that don't necessarily apply to certain communities. And I don't know if I'm making any sense, but they've kind of evened the playing field, and kind of neutralized a lot of the issues that are coming out of the Black community, and some of the issues that I've spoken about before about people choosing their ethnicity, so on and so forth. I feel like it takes the power, like some of the laws that we have in Canada take the power away from Black folks from really building strong communities here. Did that make sense? I felt like I was saying words and nothing was.
No. I get what
you're making sense.
Make perfect sense.
I really think it's a complex issue, and when I do anti-racism training, that's the first thing I do straight out of the box, especially as a sociologist. I define what racism is, and I'm like, it's not that Oxford definition, that watered down version, and white people on Facebook calling you racist because, or telling, I define exactly what racism is, and I won't have any discussions until we're all on the same page. I think that is critically important when we're having these discussions, especially with white people, because we've got to back them up from the very beginning, so that they know that we know. They have to know that we understand the definitions and of our experiences.
Oh, and I just want to let people know there's a bunch of people in our chat, and let us know who you are. So say hi.
Yeah, say hi, everybody. Hi.
Yeah, some of them it's not saying actually what your name is. So if you would like, just say who you are, and give us. Oh, there's Robert. I see, and he's from Canada.
Hi,
in
Robert.
chat as well. So, all right. So,
if you have any questions, be sure to put them in the chat. We are watching that. So
yes. So back in 2020, the George Floyd situation was happening. So all over the world, we had a bunch of people, allies, at the rallies, and up in the videos and all of that kind of stuff. And I know Canada had similar things going on. So did you feel at that time, the love from your allies during the George Floyd protests and whatnot? What was that like in Canada? Because it was interesting here. I can do a dissertation on what it was like here.
In England too.
Right. So,
wow. You know, I spoke earlier about well, Ryan was talking about not being able to really identify as black, but be identified as black. And I was actually legitimately shocked by the allyship, or the attempts for allyship. And you know, I think for the most part, people, for the most part, people are, we are all a part of our environments, right? And culturally, what happened was a phenomenon that struck globally. So it's almost as though topics within racism became popular cultural viral videos, and it's taken up in the same popularity as a cat that can do something weird on TikTok. So
Sure.
like, as an example, it may be a bad example, but it became like another thing that just went viral, and it didn't, yes, it had the racial aspects of it, but in a sense it was also just something that was a hot topic for that moment. And I think it has tilted the way people have access or are a little bit more careful in how they do things. I think that it did, here in my experience, stimulate a conversation that I never thought I would ever see or hear in my country. Um, but because of the history of the pain of blackness, it falls so short of, you see the fundamentals of how systemically we are disenfranchised, and the inability to have real conversations is still very prevalent. And this popular video that goes viral that stimulated a global conversation is wonderful, but as soon as that kind of like the next viral thing starts to happen, then it's like kind of like Me Too, right? So
Yeah,
Me Too is a
exactly.
hot thing, and all these women, blah, 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 and these topics are still relevant, and all of these things still happen. But, you know, patriarchy and misogyny, you know, has it really changed that much in the global scheme of things? And
Right.
so while there was a conversation that was stimulated, I don't know how much actual change. There's been some changes or more awareness, but I don't know, maybe there's a little bit more allyship. I don't know. I can't tell, because I still feel the microaggressions. I still feel everything that I felt before that. So I
Mm.
can't say that it fundamentally changed my life in any way. That it was a great moment in history to be acknowledged in that way. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Maybe it's too early still
Mm.
to see how the effects that are. There's something about Canada though that I will say, we have to go along to get along so much in this country, that as we, like, as a mother that has to raise black men, to, you know, you don't want them to get in trouble, you want them to know who they are, but you don't want them to also get into trouble. And so you, to a certain extent, you pass on the colonial idealism to your children so that they fit in, and that they don't, you know, cause too many ripples. And so in that, it hurts their ability to break the generational curse of racism in our country, because it doesn't allow for pockets of insertion to have real conversations, to insert real change. So I don't know about allyship is when the white women who raise their children stop allowing them to believe that they're superior. That might make some more of a splash in helping, and even especially the white women fucking black men. That would be really nice if they didn't, you know,
Oh,
maintain the status quo within the
Yeah.
family. I know I'm gonna get shot down like hell for all of the things that I'm saying, but
But
it's just how I feel and what I see. You
you
can
you
pick
know
up
you
on it.
you're so right, because I felt the same way. I felt like it was a trend that people jumped on, because I'd be about that life. And I've been about that life because when I was 17 years old, a man from Chicago who lives here became my mentor and started teaching me and getting me integrated with the community. So we did a lot of things when I was young, and I watched my mentors actually accomplish a lot of pushing the needle forward. But I was always taught not to fight directly, but to work with these communities to get things going. He always says, like, he was my martial arts instructor, and that's the Ishiru Karate. It's that you come with peace, but you prepare for war. We always came with peace, did things that benefited ourselves and benefited the other party. So we worked with the municipalities. We worked with the Calgary Police. I sat on the board talking to the police about issues that I was growing up, because there was a lot of gang violence when I was growing up. And I was one of those youths that if I didn't get saved, I would have went down the same path. So, I watch my mentors do a lot of goodness in the community. But when this Black Lives Matter happened, a lot of people hijacked Black struggles and were appropriating the culture from America, right? And they were like, you had these overnight activists that were like, Black Lives Matter, and they were just running with it. And the thing is that they are powerful people now because white folks support them.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Validation.
So I stayed out. I stayed out of the conversation. I said, for me, I know my Blackness, and I think that when you're in America, the activism and having, like, it's a strategic plan, and the plans are done years in advance. There are models that you can study on activism. Here, everyone's coming from this country, and nothing wrong with immigration. What I'm saying is that they have no models of liberation, and not saying that they don't have models of fighting the government, so on and so forth. You can come from Sudan and have everyone has their own issues. But when it comes to systemic racism, no one has a consensus of what that means to them. And then you have these overnighters that come up and they become activists, and they don't engage the elders in the community. They don't engage the people that have done it before. They don't give props. And then they're being awarded for their activism. And then they're asking you, why don't you want to help us? Why don't you want to come out? How come you're not protesting? I'm like, are you going to protect me? Like, how is your protesting going to benefit me? So when you look at 2 years later, you're asking yourself, well, what did they do? Some people I know did stuff. Other people, were riding on the coattails of Black Lives Matter, and it was unfair. And then all of the white people that I had to fight, even ones that I dated, you know what I mean? And now that they and everybody got the hand on the TikTok, they got the, what's up?
Right.
I'm Black Lives Matter, and you have to fight them about the issues that are happening in the community. I said, no, you don't understand. Black people are not a monolith. Well, the BIPOC, and then they will pin other activists against you. They'd be like,
this is why BIPOC is bullshit.
I don't know. I'm not gonna say BIPOC is bullshit, but
BIPOC is bullshit. I'm saying it.
Well, I just want to jump in and say that, dear white people, you cannot self-appoint as an ally. Can we talk about that? You have to be invited to the picnic. You just can't show up with your raisin-filled potato salad. Okay? You have to be invited. So if you're running around talking about, I'm an ally, Black Lives Matter. No, you're not. Allyship is not self-appointment.
Yeah.
I just want to throw that in there because that's one thing that is my pet peeve.
In addition to that, you're not an ally. And I'm all the women that like to swipe me on Tinder, let me just tell you a message.
Uh-oh.
I'm joking. But I would tell everybody that you're not an ally if you are not talking to your own family members and absolving the racist attitudes that you have in your own lineage. Because so many people that I've met over the years, my grandfather's racist, my auntie's racist, your cousin's racist. As soon as I hear that, you cut. You know what I mean? Because because we have to understand, we always have to, when it comes to racism, and this is just my opinion, we have to understand that it's always ties back to equity. And I was in a relationship because like there's not like this is another conversation about dating and not seeing black women coming up on my dating feed. And you know, not that I'm being forced to date white women, it's just that there's not a large pool of black women here. So I was having this conversation with, you know, someone I was dating, and I was like, you know, this matters to me because I think it matters that your parents, your grandparents, and all that stuff aren't racist. Because if you died and we got married and we share, and you own a house or you have property, you have equity, will the family come involved and try to take access away from you from that equity? You know, we always got to tie it back to equity, because when it comes down to it, and when you leave and you depart from these social circles, they keep the equity with them and you're left with nothing. You know, and I think that, not that I want the equity, it's just that I'm saying that, you know, if these allies are not battling racism as hard as we are and not targeting, they don't even need black folks for validation. You do you and stay the hell out of our conversations. Don't come into the chats to weigh in. Well, I think, no, we don't care what you think. Let black folks talk about black business. What
Right.
you need to do is start having these conversations with your people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You know everything about dog, cat, donkey, horse. You could tell me every breed about horse, but you can't tell me, but you don't know anything about racism. And you want me to explain to you how racism, you know, like my experience. And you want to sit down. I just want to hear your experience. No, what you need to do is recognize that you are in power, recognize that you do have the equity, and do something about sharing that equity, or going into your communities and dismantling the racism that you see. Because that's the thing that I'm starting to learn, is that a lot of these folks behind closed doors are saying the N word and they're calling themselves an ally. A lot of them are having conversations that we're not privy to. We only know our white friends as our white friends because we grew up with them, but we don't know what happens when they're talking to their grandma, their grandparents, and you know those sort of discussions. So you have to prove to me without a shadow of a doubt that you're not racist, and not only that you're not racist, that you're anti-racist, that you are, that there are deliverables
But
of your activism before I would ever call you an ally.
if we're going to be honest, though, there's really no allies, because if you have a privilege, you're gonna work to get rid of the privilege that you have. It's just not gonna. It doesn't make sense. So when people say that they're allies, it's like, to what end? Because are you really going to work to get rid of the advantage that you have?
There's an interesting question, and like a movie idea that I had was, there are some folks, I'm sure, if they could be born again, if you ask certain, like, you know, if you ask diverse group of black folks, would you, if you had a choice to come back as white, would you take it? You know? And some people would see, they may, some of them will say no, but some people would secretly say yes. You know, because
Yeah,
they
they
want
would.
that, they want that privilege,
They
you know?
would.
Because your auntie is bleaching her skin and she's putting, you know, on contacts and lightening her hair and whatnot. You know, some people would like to have that privilege, and that's why we need to tie this conversation back to equity. Because at the end of the day, is it that you just want more power within this space? You want to be able, because if you ever look at couples in interracial relationships, especially if you ever look at couples who have it together, do you know how wide their smiles are? They're so happy. They're like, you know, the couple photos there, everybody's all smiling because they don't, now that they reached a certain class, they no longer have to focus on issues of blackness. You know, and in Canada here, You can navigate that. If you are successful here and you have money and you have means, you don't have to participate in the political discussions here. And
Okay,
people,
great. Sorry, Ryan. We're
yeah,
gonna
sorry.
we're gonna have to continue this a little bit later. We've got to jet now.
All
But we
right.
definitely
Maybe
want to pick this conversation up.
Great conversation,
Um,
you guys. Thank
Again,
you.
yeah, this is really good, and I think that we really need to have these conversations. And there was a person in the chat who said, "Where do Latinos fall in this?" Because many of our people were wiped out, and no one talks about that.
That's that
And
BIPOC stuff again.
right, and you know what? This isn't really the conversation for that either, because we're talking about Black people's issues in this particular discussion, and this is a thing that needs to be taken to the Latino community. So they are doing podcasts and talking about the issues that affect their community, because we can't speak to that. We don't have that lived experience, and this is the problem when they lump all of us together.
That's
So
why
I would
BIPOC
encourage you
sucks.
to go to the Latinos communities and or start a podcast yourself and have these really rich, in-depth conversations. So I just want to give a thanks to LA and to Ryan for being with us tonight. And Kinte, I'm going to give you the last word.
Yeah, I mean, this conversation was awesome. Of course, I love both of you guys. You guys are awesome, and you guys bring such great insight to any conversation that you take a part of. So, we're gonna have many more conversations, and it doesn't have to be just about you guys being Canadian, because you guys have thoughts on all kind of issues. So, we're not gonna keep using you for your Canadianness, but or maybe we might. But thank you so much. I'm gonna start off with you, LA. Not only tell us who you're from, who you're from, where you from, and not where you from. I'm sorry. Your social media. I guess it's been a while. I've been on hiatus for a minute.
It's all good.
Your social media, as well as you have a new book out. Tell us about your book.
This
Oh,
is
yeah.
my book. It is called The Adventures of a Recovering Sex Addict, Volume 1, Married Men and Fuckboys. And it's about Callie Church, who is based off of my life. And what she's doing is she's on her journey towards healing and sexual sovereignty after the demise of her marriage and the realization that she's been sexually abused since she was very young. And the death of her father stimulates a bunch of repressive memories. Although you don't see that necessarily in this book, what you get in this book is a succession of short stories that are very juicy, filled with wisdom and self-accountability. So I hope you go to my website at thisislaway.com and check it out. You can purchase one for $20 plus whatever the shipping rates are. And on social media, on IG, you can get me at The Cocktail Hour. No, The Cocktail Brand, rather. And cocktail is spelled as a story. So it's COCKTALE and then the cocktail brand. So the cocktail brand. And that's it for me. Go buy
You,
my book.
you know what? I thought that was a drawing of you on the cover of the book.
It is a drawing of me. I took a
Oh,
picture
okay.
like this, and somebody,
Oh, wow.
a really famous Ghanaian illustrator out here by the name of Joseph Bonsu, illustrated me because I wanted
Oh,
to
that's a
make
great
her
cover.
iconic because I have so many more stories to come. So stay tuned for Callie Church. We got picked up for a screenplay coming out next year to
Oh,
tell the
wow.
story of the adventures of a recovering sex addict. So stay tuned for that.
That's great. Wow. All
Thank
right.
you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. What about you, Ryan? How can we get you on social media, and what do you have on the lookout for us to be on the lookout for?
Well, I call myself the digital stem cell because I couldn't find anything else to describe me. I do so much different things. I'm neurodivergent activist neurodivergent advocate. I have dyslexia, dyspraxia, and a bunch of other things, which kind of make me unique in a way that I have multiple hyper interests. So if you just follow me at Digital Stem Cell, that will lead you into my links where you can check out my Dr. Sabi channel. That's 40,000 people on TikTok, and I break down Dr. Sabi claims. I have a channel on dyslexia, And and then of course I have Hustle Zone TV, where it's a strictly Black content and humor and things that are happening within the community. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We're starting a company called, which will be in your part of the woods, Kente, called Parachute Media Group. And we have our first show that we've been working on is called Antoinette and Friends, where we interview celebrities. We had Sharon Gless from Cagney and Lacey on the show.
Oh, wow.
We had Renee Taylor on the show, George Zarian, George Lopez. We had Sinbad, so on and so forth. And we are being executively produced by the legend Norman Seeff. So if you don't know who Norman Seeff is, he is the famous filmmaker and photographer that did the iconic Ray Charles picture and the Steve Jobs picture. But he's our DP of photography.
Wow.
And he shoots these, so we moving on up from the Blab days. Moving on up.
I love it. I love it.
Either
man.
way, that's what we're working on.
I love it. You can get me at Kinte F on Twitter, Kinte Ferguson on Instagram. And of course, the website is theindyradio.com. That's theindyradio.com. We've been hacked. So right now our website is suspended, and I have somebody working on it, trying to get it back together. It's a pain in the ass. So, but like I said, this wasn't a great week for me. But that is the web address. Hopefully soon it'll be back up and running. But thank you, Russian hackers. I thought y'all were at a war. Why are y'all messing with my website? But Carlette, last word for you.
You can find me on Instagram at Ms. Lette. That's MSLETTE, US UK. CarletteNorwood.com and Ms. Lette on Twitter.
All right. Well, with that said, thank you, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.